Okay, welcome everyone. I, Council President Walsh, call the September 30th Special Committee of the Whole meeting to order at 7:15 p.m. As a reminder, we continue to have a remote aspect to our meetings, and both staff and members of the public may be participating in tonight's meeting remotely via WebEx. And on tonight's meeting, we are going to start with public comment. And so if you are members of the public may address council at this time in person or virtually. Those who signed up in advance to make comments will be called on first. If you're joining us virtually and would like to make a comment, please raise your virtual hand. If you're on the phone, you're going to press *3. If you're on a computer or smart device, look for the hand icon, or you can send the host a chat message. I would say if you're in the room and did not sign up, I'll ask for speakers, but there's nobody in the room, so far that's not happening. But I will wait a moment just to see if anyone online wishes to raise their hand. And in doing so, I will check with the clerk and see if anyone has signed up to speak or indicated a desire to speak.
Council President, no one has signed up previously to speak, and among our online attendees, I do not see any virtual hands raised at this time. Okay.
Well, as a reminder, written comments always can be submitted at any time by emailing citycouncil@issaquah.gov. Okay. So looking at our agenda then, after public comment, we've got 2 agenda items. COM 0074, Public Safety Facilities Follow-Up, Leasing and Next Steps. And then we'll have COM 0075, the 2025-2026 Budget, Transmittal of Preliminary Budget. So we will start with the Public Safety Facilities Follow-Up, presented by Autumn Monahan, the Administrative Services Director.
Good evening, Council. Again, my name is Autumn Monahan. I'm the Administrative Services Director for the city, and our department includes facilities. I also have 2 folks online with me as well tonight, our Court Administrator, Christy Shorn, and our Administrative Services Manager, Jeannie Justice. So the purpose of tonight's presentation is to provide information regarding court and council chamber relocation, provide proposed next steps for public safety facilities work, and receive your feedback. Direction that we're looking for this evening is, should administration proceed with lease negotiations and relocation for the Issaquah Municipal Court and for City Council chambers? And should administration proceed with a consultant selection to support plan refinement, task force facilitation, and community outreach? So starting with municipal court, earlier this year, administration proposed moving our first puzzle piece in our very large puzzle of moving Issaquah Municipal Court to the King County District Court office, which is across town. Amazingly, they have space, and they are willing and excited to lease that space to us. This will help in several ways. One is addressing our space, function, and best practice issues that we've talked about previously around operating a municipal court in this building, as well as this building's deficiencies. It will greatly improve customer service and operations by co-locating these 2 courts in one building. First off, the building was built to be a court, so that's great. Secondly, we do have customers that come here looking for district court or go across town and are looking for municipal court. So co-locating them is something that's exciting to both courts, that we would have one place. This option also enhances physical safety and accessibility. They have a full-time security on site. They also have holding cells. Provides secure meeting rooms for confidential counsel, and provides flexibility for service growth. So we are not able to proceed any further with lease negotiations with King County until we get some form of commitment from the council. The county is starting to spend money as they're working toward developing a proposed lease for us, and are looking for some form of commitment, which is why we're here tonight, of whether we can proceed with negotiations on a lease. You'll see here there's one-time costs for tenant improvements. That includes furniture, equipping the new courtroom with our IT equipment, signage, and if we do move council chambers, you'll need a new dais. So we've estimated that at $750,000. There's also annual costs. So the proposed rent for the space at King County District Court is $200,000 a year. That includes the security. Also, council chambers, that is still TBD. I think there's, a few options we can pursue if you're interested in us looking at that, whether it's looking at our own facilities for a place for council chambers or partnering perhaps with another agency in town. So we are still researching that, and there's more to come. Internet service would cost a bit of money for 2 new locations. And then we put on here an estimate of how much it costs to currently operate this building, along with the security costs for court at $135,000. So in total, we'd be spending another $95,000 per year on court. Pretty similar as far as the costs, except as, of course, we get the operational and security benefits of moving to King County. I also did want to mention, when we first looked at perhaps building a new court back in 2023, the estimated cost for construction would be $14 to $18 million. If we proceed with this option, the building would essentially be shuttered for the time being. The next step is we'd have to move a lot of IT infrastructure out of this building and then also demolish it at some point. That could be the next phase of this project, and that could also be funded with a potential bond measure, which we'll talk about later in the presentation. So the cost of status quo. This building needs some immediate near-term improvements. We have a lot of issues with moisture in this building. So it needs a new roof. It needs a complete envelope replacement for the building. It needs new HVAC, new doors and flooring. It also has some ADA needs that we should start making some progress on if this is going to be a public facility in the long term. So we've estimated those costs at about $1 million. And then again, I put on here the annual costs of $135,000. Again, status quo means no enhancements as far as the functional needs that you've heard from court or for us to ensure the provision of justice. Another quick item to mention is that during the first big rainfall we had about a month ago, we started seeing some leaking outside of this room here. And so we are making some temporary improvements and just really a Band-Aid for the situation. It's going to cost about $55,000. Those will continue as we are kind of band-aiding this building and kind of limping along with it. So that's what you've seen out here. If you've seen some work happening for this building, it's just for some patchwork, just to ensure that we're not having some leaks come through. So we have been discussing space planning with the council for a couple years now, and we had a few tours this summer, and administration came to council with a proposal. The feedback we've summarized here. So the police space and functional needs are the highest priority. Most seem supportive of relocating the court. There were some mixed thoughts on the best location for a new Fire Station 71. Desire for a clear vision for a city hall. Heard some support for an Old Town campus using our city-owned property. There was some discussion around leasing and a preference that it would be short-term, if any, for city hall space. An interest in expansion of a potential bond package to include city hall and or other facility needs. A need for input from a diverse task force on plans and potential bond packages, as well as broad community engagement. Support for improved maintenance of existing facilities and addressing the facility condition assessment deficiencies. And then more discussion desired in overall facility planning. So Jeannie Justice and I have been meeting with a few consultants who have experience in facilitating task force or agencies through bond conversations, as well as kind of that next level of work that we need for the police department. So we've given you very rough order of magnitude estimates for what we think would be needed for that building, but it's time to now actually dive into what that scope is and learn a bit more about best practices, what's the latest and greatest on safety for police, what are those trends, and also accommodating any future growth. And so we're looking for that next kind of diving a bit more into the details so we have a better idea of the cost of that. And we found a few consultants who can do both, which would be preferred, that we've got one consultant team that can help us with some of that engagement, as well as diving into really further scoping the police department. So we're proposing to develop a task force that would be appointed by the mayor, estimating 7 members, 3 alternates. This group would research and look at our work to date on the city's facility needs. They would review other potential locations for Fire Station 71 and City Hall, evaluate options for a potential bond package, and then provide feedback on a community engagement plan along with a survey, and then deliver a recommendation back to the City Council. So as a recap, the timeline would include us engaging with the consultant now and recruiting for the task force, as well as negotiating, further negotiating the lease terms with King County for court. Then in the winter, we would refine those police renovation, that plan, what it looks like, hold the task force meetings, and relocate the court and potentially council chambers, depending on what we find for space. In the spring, we would have broad and community engagement and a recommendation to the council. And if we wanted to put something on the ballot, decision would have to be made for November of 2025. It would have to be made in the summer. With that, I'm here to answer any questions.
Is that up? Okay, fantastic. We'll start with Councilmember Hunt and then Deputy Council President.
Thank you, Council President. Firstly, on the municipal court relocation, you mentioned one of the benefits being future service flexibility. Could you explain a little bit more about what you mean by that?
We're pretty packed in this current facility, and so if we ever wanted to expand our court services to other agencies, there'd be more flexibility in that facility versus this one.
Okay, and then I'm wondering either now, if you have this, or if you could provide this separately, if you could provide a breakdown of the $750,000 cost for furniture, the cost of doing the HVAC and the near-term renovation to this building is $1 million, and so it seems like I was also interested when you said that there's the dais or the facility for furniture for the court, or for the council chambers rather, because that isn't actually part of the plan to relocate those services there, and $750,000 for furniture and signage sure seems like a lot relative to how much it would cost to renovate this building. So I would really like a breakdown of that. It seems. And I'm also interested if there's any way to cut down those costs. I agree that the cost of the ongoing services is similar between the two options, but that does seem like a lot, especially for furniture and signage.
Sure.
Okay, and then lastly, I did have a question around the plan for the community survey part of the community outreach. We will form a task force. Is there any consideration of, or have you done any planning as far as where a community survey might fit into that timeline?
Not yet. I'd like to really engage with our community task force to think through that engagement plan. I would definitely want to get through most of the meetings with the task force so that they could help with crafting some of those questions. But I think that's something we'd work out with the task force as far as the timing of that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Deputy Council President, followed by Councilmember Hall.
Thanks. So a couple of questions about the task force. It says review other potential locations. Is that other potential locations that haven't been presented to us already? What does it mean, other potential locations?
For the fire station?
Yeah, and fire station and city hall, it says.
Yeah, we have identified a few locations, whether it's this building, whether it's the one where it's currently located. There have been a few others that have been assessed, like the state park location. So there's a few others. There isn't a whole lot of new locations, but there are a few. And so I think what we heard from council too was wanting a bit more due diligence and thought behind the location as far as a recommendation of where it should go.
And then it says evaluate options for a potential bond package, but it sounds like the task force is not actually going to to make the bond package. Is that right? Sounds like they're going to sort of evaluate it. And then, so is it the council that will put the bond package together, or who's going to put the bond package
The
together?
task force would recommend a bond package.
So they will recommend. So it isn't, okay, so evaluate options for a bond package.
Yes,
Yes,
yeah.
okay, all right. And so this is just a quibble, but, but if it's appointed by the mayor, wouldn't the recommendation come back to the mayor? It just, I mean, I've always heard that if it's a mayor appointed,
Sure.
they report to the mayor. If it's a council appointed, they report to the council. So just a quibble there on how that recommendation ends up. And then I think the mayor would present it to us as part of the package of information that finally comes to us. So,
Sounds good.
okay, so those are just my thoughts there. So I don't have any questions about moving the court over to the courthouse at this point. Thank you.
Councilmember Hall?
Thank you. A couple questions. One I hadn't thought of until just now to ask before. So if we were to move council chambers, that would inherently mean moving ICTV, right? So would they follow council, or would they follow general government wherever we decide to lease? What's the plan there?
So they would follow council as far as some equipment that would have to be on site for covering council meetings. We also have a podcast studio, or where we've also filmed, and so that could align better with City Hall.
Okay, understood.
So a little of both.
Little of both.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. And then for clarity, one of the benefits that was reiterated to us frequently was that this site is so close to the jail, and so there's a lot of efficiencies there. But there's the same benefit of having the holding cell at King County District Court. Is that right? Did I hear that right on our tour? So
Yes.
we think of that the same way.
Yes, exactly. There's not as much urgency because we have a holding cell for police to arrive right away for transport.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question was kind of around timing for investments in this property, along the lines of what I emailed you earlier today, and thank you for the response. I was wondering if you can kind of walk us through that a little bit. I guess I had asked what happens if, I'm seeing some nods, maybe you read the email. So I guess the question for you then is the skinny of that really just if we decide to use this space in any way, let's say council chambers keeps using it, there could be unexpected repairs in addition to whatever $1 million or whatever large amount of investments we need to make in the property. Is that right? Or is it that for delaying that there could be unexpected repairs?
Yes, if we were to delay and just keep council chambers here, we probably could Band-Aid it for a bit. We don't know how long until the HVAC may break, or we may have further damage due to the roof or due to water damage. And so it's just kind of, it's a bit of a risk, but we could Band-Aid it for a while.
What about the ADA improvements? Is there a timeline to implement that, or is that something be delayed? I mean, what are the regulations around that?
From my understanding, I believe it can be delayed. It's just that we have a really long ADA plan, right? And I know the priorities are facilities that are open to the community for accessibility. And so it was important to us to include that if this was going to be a long-term facility that the community needed to access, whether for court or for council chambers, those upgrades need to be made.
All right, makes sense. Thank you.
Councilmember Mertz?
Couple of questions. How are we going to constitute the community task force?
What do you mean as far as select the members?
It's going to be 7 people with 3 alternates.
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to figure out? I mean, I think about all the constituencies in the city.
Sure.
And I've been lucky enough to be involved in task forces on the school district side. And they represent every elementary school and every middle school and every high school and the sports people and so on and so forth. I mean, just to think off the top of my head, mobility advocates, transit advocates, equity advocates, and you could probably come up with 15 constituencies in the city that would have a potential interest in this task force work. So how are we gonna figure out 7 + 3?
I would love your feedback that we can also share with the mayor as far as what you'd like to see as far as representation, and any feedback too on the size. This was just a taking from some of Dale's work recently with the strategic plan task force, ensuring that it doesn't get too big, right? But that you also
Sure.
have enough voices and perspectives in the room. So
Sure. I will tell you that the reason that the school district has a sterling reputation in getting bonds passed is they have something for everyone. And the reason that they have something for everyone is they bring everyone to the table. And they don't leave until everyone at the table says, okay, yeah, I got something here, right? So, previous capital efforts that we have put forward, there have been concerns about whether those, the projects that we put forward were reflective of the community interest. So, my general advice would be to err on the side of larger more than smaller. I know that too many cooks spoil the broth, but I really do feel like the district, my experience with the district, having, I hate to say everything but the kitchen, everything in the kitchen sink, but really more is more in that situation. The other question I had for you is why fall 2025? Your model presupposes that if there's going to be a bond, it would be fall of 2025. Do we particularly like the November election of 2025? Because it's the municipal election, right? We have municipal election, we have federal and state elections a year off of that, and then we could run on a different date that is neither of those, right? And those all have strengths and weaknesses associated with them. So have we looked at fall of 2025 and we like fall of 2025 for some reason?
So I selected that date for this draft timeline just so that we get the work going with some flexibility that it could be, you could pick a different date that would be in 2026. But that's probably the soonest that we can do this work, engage a task force in the community, better define the scope, and be ready.
I would look carefully at the history of bonds and levies, both at municipal elections and at the federal state elections and in off cycle, and see what that looks like in terms of voter turnout and whether you get as broad of a cross section in each of those as others. I think you will find differences between them. Thanks.
Councilmember Ray.
One real simple question. Can you talk a little bit more about the relocation of council chambers? Because that one kind of threw me a little bit, and kind of not quite sure what we're thinking or where we're thinking of going or what the drivers are, yada, yada, yada.
Sure. So our goal is if we're successful in moving court and if we are able to reduce the other uses of this building, we can shutter it and not spend more money on this building. The key is finding an adequate spot for council chambers. And so, one option could be that we renovate Tibbetts and make that a council chambers. Another is looking to maybe other agencies or places that may have something similar to this setup to see if there's flexibility in finding space. So, for example, the school district has its old boardroom that's now at a preschool that's not used in the evening. So is that an option? So we're looking at all options right now. I don't have a recommendation yet of which one is the best, but we can continue that work if council is interested.
Great. I think it's worth exploring, but so it is disintegrated from the move of the court. Those are two separate and discrete decisions.
Two puzzle pieces, yes.
Two discrete decisions.
Councilmember Joe.
Thank you. Autumn, thanks for the presentation tonight. I know you're playing Tetris with giant pieces and giant dollars. The question I had also concerned the council chambers and whether or not, what are the minimum requirements that we would need? Do we actually have to have cable TV and cameras there? Or are we able to just record the meeting and post it later? If so, can we take a look at a skinny down version, so to speak, of council chambers where cameras and the cable TV are not necessarily all traveling with us as one big caravan? Just a question.
We can look into that further. If we do move council chambers, these cameras come with us, and a lot of the equipment would come with us. So Tim has started some of that work with IT to figure out what that would look like and what those costs are too. So
So if we move to Tibbetts, for example, would we have to have the cameras there with us, or could we do a skinny down version so that we're not having to move all that equipment, with us as part of the move?
It would be better production value if we had the cameras. That's
Right.
maybe my communications bias
No,
a bit.
I understand production value. I
Sure.
know that we all like being on TV, but I think our citizens also understand we're trying to make this as cost-effective as possible too. So if you could just explore whether or not, what the
Sure.
minimums are for a meeting, so that
Sure.
we can evaluate that as part of the process, I think is the underlying question.
What's important to me too is audio, and a lot of times having a good camera angle on people as they're speaking is helpful too. So I would caution toward not having cameras for a council meeting and for that production value, just for the clarity for our TV channel, we do get a lot of views still on YouTube for council meetings. And so having that production value, I think, is important.
Yeah.
But yeah,
As part of
I
my
think
work, I listen to a lot of council meetings and see some of them too. And I do agree that the ones where there is only audio and no video, it's a little bit difficult to follow, but I've gotten really good at understanding or hearing the cadence and the particular way that different council members speak. And so I can know who's talking, and, it's just something that's acquired over time. But so I'm just saying that the cameras may not be a necessity along the way, and just ask you look into the skinny down version. Thank you.
City Administrator?
Yes, thank you. Good evening. From the administration standpoint, the cameras are really important. I mean, we already have lovely cameras here. What we are doing here is a television show. And so we really want to make sure that we are as accessible as possible, because as I think we all know, we don't see a lot of folks come visit, but we do see people, we see the numbers on YouTube. People are watching the meetings. And so we want to make sure that wherever we go, we have that ability. We can take all these lovely cameras with us, so there's no additional cost and investment in infrastructure, obviously the costs of moving and whatnot. But from the administration standpoint, we would not ever want us to just go to audio. We think that this is a much too engaged community. We have great presentations. I think what we've been able to do post-pandemic to combine both the video of the speaker and the PowerPoints, I think has been great. So while I appreciate Councilmember Joe's concern about costs and skinnying down, from the administration standpoint, we want to continue to produce a public meeting that our residents can watch and enjoy and hopefully get something out, because they're certainly not coming and joining us in person on Monday evenings very often.
If you could just look into the question, give us the numbers, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay, let me go down my list. I'm wondering if we have any other information about how other communities handled their timelines. To me, it seems like a decision by council in summer 2025 to have a ballot measure in November of 2025 seems rather late. And so I'm wondering if, as we go through this process, we can get that information to better understand that. Let's see. And then what is the timeline for the IPD cost estimates? Would that be available for the task force to review, or do you think it would be coming after?
Gosh, I think we'll have to engage with a consultant to see what that would be as far as a timeline. It'd be great if we could have that in time for the task force to review, but definitely in time for us going out for a bond measure.
Okay. Okay. Those were my questions. So looking at it, opening up to public comment again, no one in the room, but if you're online, you can hit *3 on the phone or raise your hand or send the host a chat message. So we'll see if anybody online has an interest in making comment on the public safety facilities follow-up item. Clerk, do we have anybody indicating a desire to speak?
Not at this time, Council President.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, council direction time. Who wants to start us off? Councilmember Ray, you got there first. Thank you.
I always like to go first, and then blaze the trail. So 2 questions. Should the administration proceed with lease negotiations and relocate municipal court and city council chambers? I'm kind of a split decision on this one. I think that the argument for relocating municipal court is pretty compelling, and the costs are pretty reasonable. And I think it opens up some interesting new probabilities in terms of new services. So I personally am supportive of that. In terms of relocating council chambers, I understand the desire to remove council chambers if we are would be the sole tenant of this building, but I'd like to see a lot more information about where it would be, what it would be, how it would look. This is probably one of those questions that actually probably resonates at a very personal level with all of us, because this is where we do our business. So that's kind of my first thought. And then I'm proceeding with the consultant selection, support plan refinement, task force facilitation, and community outreach. To me, it seems like this is the chicken and egg from my perspective. It don't feel like we've got a solid grasp of where we're going with the task force and the bond plan, if there is one, and community outreach. So I don't know if it's too soon to engage with a consultant, or maybe if what you're saying is we need the consultant so we can put some specificity around our plan. In that case, I think that you should probably do that and get moving on putting together the structure here. And I think that based on some of the comments I heard from my colleagues earlier, kind of in terms of the task force, we probably should think long and hard about how we want to structure. Thank you. That's.
Anybody else jumping up? Councilmember Joe?
Thank you. Appreciate the hard work that's been done on the relocation of the Issaquah Municipal Court. I think moving them to the district court's a great idea. The facility is great. It has fantastic jury rooms and facilities for all the things that need to be done there. City council chambers, I believe we should go ahead and relocate the council chambers. And my thought there is that we need to, fish or cut bait, basically. And with the council chambers vacated and us in a other location, we can then decide how we want to put the rest of the pieces together. Keeping 1 foot in the boat and 1 foot on the dock only leads to us falling into the water if we're not careful. So my thought is that let's go ahead and take the definitive act of going ahead and moving the council chambers and our meetings so this building can be properly taken care of, and we can give the consultant a clean bill to look at or a clean slate to look at, and not have council wavering back and forth. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Joe, for those comments and swimming upstream. Really appreciate it. We'll go with Councilmember Martz.
Yeah, I love the dock analogy, of course. Speaks to my heart. Proceeding with lease negotiations and relocation of Issaquah Municipal Court and City Council chambers. No. I've said before, I don't believe we should start moving the chess pieces around until we have a more comprehensive plan about what we're going to do. I hate the idea of leasing anything from anybody when we have tons of real estate that we own in the city. I have for 13 of the last 15 years been talking about how to get rid of Tibbetts Valley Manor. But if by using Tibbetts Valley Manor, we could not lease council chamber space someplace else, our old parks director, Ann, McGill, would be so amused that I would be arguing in favor of Tibbetts Valley Manor at all. But that would be a better use than us giving money to somebody else when we are real estate rich. So I am a big bah humbug on item number 1. However, I am 100% in support of going with a consultant on all the big questions in front of us. I think that should include size of a task force, constitution of a task force, all those kinds of things. When you want to run a bond, all that kind of stuff. So I am. We should do that tomorrow, and I'm in support. So no and yes. Thank you.
Deputy Council President DeMichelle.
Thank you. I support the idea of going ahead with lease negotiations and relocation of the Issaquah Municipal Court over to the District Court. I just think that's a great facility, and that's going to be a great boost to our court. I am in agreement with Councilmember Ray that I need a lot more information about what we are going to do about city council chambers. I do love the idea of going over to the school district. They have a very nice room there, and I think it's all set up for IT and everything. And maybe maybe we could do a partnership instead of a lease. So just a thought. So, but I need more information about that before, I support us figuring out where we're going to go. In terms of the consultant, I think we should get going with the consultant. Let's get going on this. And I think a consultant will help us refine the plan a lot more and tell us where we need to go. I agree with Councilmember Martz that 7 people is not nearly enough to be representative of our community. And if we double that number, we don't need alternates. I don't understand why we would have alternates on that kind of a task force. Everybody gets a vote, and I don't think we need that. So I also think the idea of identifying maybe a matrix of some kind, what interest groups or neighborhoods, or however we want to do it, but identifying what interest groups and neighborhoods we want to include on that task force so that we really represent the diversity of our community. And that could be it could be done many different ways. So, but I do think we should be thoughtful about that, how that is put together, and not just, call people from our current boards and commissions, but really look at how can we get some grassroots representation going. So, yeah, let's get going on it. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Councilmember Hall.
I feel largely the exact same way as Councilmember Ray. I thought you put it really nicely. I agree that the operational benefits of moving court are very compelling. But also don't feel necessarily yet the same way about council chambers, although I take to heart that having any use in this building means there could be unintended consequences, and at some point we really do need to put in the actual investment that's needed in order for this to be a usable space. But I'm really mixed, largely because of there's consistency for community who do come and engage with the council. But I'm happy to have staff be looking into options. I agree with what's been said in terms of needs more information about what's out there. Tibbetts sounds very interesting to me just because, I mean, not really, but it's interesting because we avoid lease costs with that. Also, I don't know, I'm the kind of council member, I don't think we need a dais. I really like how North Bend has it, how the Eastside Fire and Rescue boardroom, that could potentially be space. How you just kind of wheel out tables and everyone's on equal footing and stuff like that. And I think that works out nicely, and then you don't have to make an investment in something that seems grand like this. I also think it's fine to proceed with consultant to start getting some specificity around our numbers. I support the idea of a task force considering all of the locations, not just the ones that we really narrow it in on here. And then also the timing of it. I thought that was a really good point, Councilmember Martz, around timing on the ballot too, because we may learn things in this budget cycle as the financial landscape starts to clear up. We may learn things from our partner agencies when they study their long-term financing needs as well, that the timing needs to be adjusted. And so I think just kind of being open about when we would go to the ballot on something like this is important. And then the last thing I wanted to say was I wonder if it might be possible to have a community survey before the task force to be able to have some information on kind of fire and police needs through the lens of kind of community members in a survey give to the task force as helpful information, and also helpful information to us, because I would rather know earlier that the community is not interested whatsoever in a bond than later, spending all the money and manpower on it, right? So I'm wondering if that might be possible as well. And those are my comments. Thanks.
Councilmember Hunt?
Thank you. On the first question about the municipal court, firstly, I would really like more information about that $750,000. One of the benefits of moving to a space that is already a court, I would assume, is that a lot of the furniture and a lot of the setup is there and is built to that purpose. And then also I was confused by the mention of the council chamber, the dais or other furniture that would be associated with that move, because we at least are thinking about those separately, and they could be taken separately. So how much of that is associated with council chambers? Also, how much of a separate and currently unaccounted for cost is there of moving the cameras and ICTV to a different location if we were to move, for example, to Tibbetts Manor, as has been floated. So I would really want to see those costs broken out. Similarly with signage, it is a municipal court, and so presumably the signage is directing people to a court, and so how much of that is on the city to make those changes. Again, I think my assumption would be that since it's already a court, we would be able to have a savings there. And right now, there's not enough of a difference between completely renovating this building to continue having it be suitable for a court at $1 million to that 750 one-time investment in that building. And then on the city council chambers, firstly, I do think it's very important to have video. I recall when we first had to do remote meetings during the COVID pandemic, it was so hard to track who was saying what. And I think that now at this point, our community is really used to, and it's really important that we maintain that level of service for our meetings, where people can see who's speaking and can see the presentations and can see the same information that we are presented with. So would strongly advocate for continuing to have that visual component to our meetings. I think that cost is going to be really important because we are juggling a lot of different costs. And so again, having the cost breakdown of what does it cost to move the equipment versus keeping it here while we're making a decision on what we're going out to a bond, that would be an important piece for me in weighing those. On the second question, I completely agree with Councilmember Hall on the survey. I think safety is super important to our community. It's absolutely something that does come up in conversations when I'm talking with community members. At the same time, Councilmember Ray and I were just at the farmers market, and also in conversations, people are really highly ranking concerns around affordability right now. People are really deeply concerned about the costs of housing, about the costs of living. And in trying to think through how a task force would think about this, I was kind of struggling to think, how does the community have, how much of an appetite do they have for an additional bond versus thinking, now there's more of a visual presence of police in our communities. We have made a lot of progress on that, which is a big credit to our police department. So how are they ranking these different priorities, and how much of an appetite is there for a public safety bonds given the affordability concerns that we have right now? So when I was trying to think about that from my perspective, and having also heard all of this information and presentations, it really seemed to me like a community group that's coming together to weigh all these options, they would really benefit from a statistically valid survey showing this is where people are in terms of how they're thinking about cost of living versus public safety versus facilities improvement and service improvements. So I would definitely advocate for that. I'm also very intrigued by my colleagues' thoughts on expanding the task force. I'm for a task force. I think it's important. I think they need to be given a lot of options to weigh, and I like the idea of having more perspectives. I was on the strategic plan task force, just the update task force. And for that one, we had council members as well as community members. And I think, from my perspective, that was a good, that was important because sometimes we had experienced different conversations or we had a different perspective that we could share. I would advocate for asking the other task force members if they also felt that that was useful, but I do think that tends to be useful also because then that goes back to council ultimately, and so council will have seen the process, which could help with the end result. So I think those are my main comments. The big one on that last one is I really think we should do a survey to help the task force have a context for making the decision first rather than at the end.
Okay, I will put in just my 2 cents on a lot of this. I've a lot of things already heard. For the first question, you know, I hear what Councilmember Mart says about not supporting leasing. Generally, I am not in favor of us leasing as a city. I think it's financially irresponsible. But the cost benefit of this, having a facility that is already built out, where the costs are very little in addition to what it would cost to run this building, let alone bring it up to spec, is quite enough to sway me to support that move. So I support the lease there. Council chamber location, I need more information on location and cost before I would be willing to go down that road. My priority, first and foremost, is to not put more money into this building. And so if that means moving us somewhere else, great. If we are having a hard time finding a place that would be useful, I'd rather we stay rather than choose to lease elsewhere. So I agree with Councilmember Hall that if you want to put us up on tables like they do at Eastside Fire and Rescue and find a location that can have cameras, I think that's perfectly acceptable. I don't want to spend extra money to have council have a space. So that's the first question. The second question, I know we've been talking about facilities for a long time. I still don't think we're quite there for this task force. I agree with a lot of what I have heard. I would love to get a community survey ahead of a task force. I don't think it needs to be statistically valid at this point, just because I don't necessarily want to spend the money and then also spend the money on a consultant. I think we've done a pretty good job of getting online survey and getting enough people involved in that to have a large enough number there in some of the past instances. But I think that information would be quite useful. And before we pull together a task force, I think we need to hire the consultant. We need to get their direction, get their advice on task force size, on scope, on the approach, all of those things. I also agree with Councilmember Hunt that having been on the recent task force, I think Dale will say having the council members there was very useful in being able to bring people back toward, you know, hey, this is what's really important, and not cycle through. And so I would definitely advocate including council members on that. I think right now, to me, we've had a lot of conversations on facilities and what the needs are there. I still don't have a clear understanding of what the scope and focus of the task force would be. And given the fact that our feedback hasn't been the same, I don't feel great about starting a task force without really having a very clear understanding of what that would be. I'm very concerned about the fire station. I think that could make or break a bond, and limiting, I know this is a good location for many reasons, but I can see how that would be problematic in a voter's eyes. And so I want to make sure that we have evaluated a lot of options. And so really getting a sense of, okay, what are they going to be making a recommendation on? What are, what's the makeup of the group? I think all of that is really important. And then I think ultimately for us in making a decision about a bond, having polling data would be important. Not just that initial survey, but actual polling data so that we can decide whether or not putting that on a ballot would be good. Because I don't think we want to face a second loss and potentially have to go back on that. And then given all of this, I feel like the November 2025 ballot is probably going to be very difficult. But I also very much agree with the concept of we should look over the data and see whether it's better to be in alignment with a municipal. Obviously we have to avoid any other ballot measures that are on there. So we would look to have more information about what the right timeline is. Okay, now anybody for round 2? No? No? Okay. You have what you need.
I do, thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Well, one agenda item down, one to go. I see Andrea's getting up there. We've got COM 0075, 2025-2026, budget transmittal of preliminary budget. Take it away, Andrea.
Thank you, Council President Walsh. I'm Andrea Snyder, Deputy City Administrator and Interim CFO. In your packet this evening, we have the preliminary budget. So that includes a memo and a budget on a page that shows the entire city budget. As we talked about a couple of weeks ago, this preliminary budget is a little different than how we have typically done things in the past. This year, unfortunately, we've had some pretty unique staff constraints that have slowed our budget drafting process. In addition, we have anticipated and forecasted pretty large difference between expenditures and revenues for 25 and 26 that have also provided some difficulties in presenting to you a balanced budget. So what you see in your packet tonight is the preliminary budget. It includes the anticipated expenditures and revenues for each of the city funds. You will also see that they're not necessarily balanced between expenditures and revenues. What is to follow is a proposed budget, which will show a better balance across those funds. So in this preliminary budget, to create this budget, we asked departments to provide their budget requests. We also asked them to reduce, especially departments reliant on the general fund, to reduce their expenditures by 12%. With some notable exceptions in police and a few other smaller departments or very urgent priorities that we felt like 12% was something we needed to discuss further, come back to council, et cetera. And so these reductions resulted in a $7 million decrease in the general fund budget, expenditure budget, over the previous biennium. Meanwhile, you'll see that the entire city budget across all funds is expected to increase by about 15% over the past biennium as adopted, due mainly to increases in capital fund and utility funds. In July, at the July City Council Budget Priority Setting Retreat, the administration presented to council some of what we felt were our urgent priorities, including facility items like the ones that Autumn just presented on, as well as some other public safety needs. None of those items are included in the preliminary budget that you see before you tonight. So I wanted to be clear that there's a lot of expenditures that I think the administration anticipates and would would suggest are urgent, that are not included in the preliminary budget that we still would like to accommodate within the proposed budget. While this preliminary budget does not include many new expenditures for the general fund, the preliminary budget does include a few new revenues, like a proposed increase to utility taxes for water, sewer, stormwater, and cable from 3% to 6%. That would have our utility taxes across the board be at 6%. For the other utilities as well, like electric, for example. The preliminary budget also includes, as part of its new revenues, adjustments to contract fees for services the city offers to other cities, for example, for jail services, for court services. Those adjustments to the contract fees would be are to reflect the rising costs for jail services and court services as well. As I stated before, further adjustments are needed in order to accommodate what the administration feels are urgent priorities, and also to ensure that the funds are balanced, and that we preserve an ending fund balance in the general fund of 15% for those undesignated expenditures. Next steps. October 28th, the administration plans on transmitting the proposed budget, coming before council and having the deliberations start then. Deliberations would then continue through the month of November and beginning part of December, with adoption slated for December 9th. Are there any questions?
I guess my question to you is, what do you need from us at this point? Is there anything you're trying to solidify tonight? Just conveying information?
Yeah, the purpose of this evening is really to transmit the budget. As is our typical practice, what we typically do is transmit the budget, provide some of that information. Council may look at it. We talk about the process, and if there's any immediate questions you have, I'd love to answer those. I know that there's not a lot of information included in this preliminary budget. It's a different budget process than what we have followed in the past, and that's again due to some of our unique constraints this year. So in the proposed budget, there's going to be a lot more information. We also anticipate some council briefings to occur mid-month, so you have more information in advance of the proposed budget. But as for tonight, we don't need any specific direction.
And Council President, if I can just add, there's a statutory requirement that 90 days prior to the end of the fiscal year that you would get this preliminary budget. We have not taken advantage of that statutory requirement in recent past. We've gone right to the preliminary budget, and there's a statutory requirement that that be 60 days. So that the reason that we're here really at all tonight is in order to satisfy the statutory requirement. I want to make that point.
Councilmember Hall?
Thank you. I'm just wondering, as part of the budget process, if we can learn or get information about household impact on utility tax increases, and kind of what we can expect that to, how we can expect that to impact individuals.
Absolutely. And we heard that request at the council retreat. That is something we'll be planning to bring back for you when we're in the council deliberations and when we have that proposed budget. I also know there's other information that we've been requested, that's been requested of us, like cost per capita and trends over time, right? So we've been tracking those questions, and we'll be prepared to bring that information back to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Deputy Council President DiMichele.
So you said that the departments have cut their budgets by 12%. Did they just do a cut, or are they working now on specifically what positions, unfortunately, and what programs are being reduced?
Yes. And so
Okay.
we will come to you with reductions. There are layoffs expected. We have told the staff between 15 and 20. We hope that that number is less than that. We are going to be proposing programs that will be reduced. Support to community organizations will be reduced. It's significant. And quite honestly, when all is said and done, there will be several departments that will be far in excess of 12%, because the police department will have only increases, and with the assistance of our representatives on the Eastside Fire and Rescue Board, we are still working on the proposed budget there, which still currently stands at a 17% increase. And so you will see other departments, again, that will be far in excess of 12%, their reduction.
I think Councilmember Hall's face right now represents the situation, the stress over all of that. Andrea, I noticed that our enterprise funds, even going into 2024, but also 25 and 26, all have significantly more expenditures than revenues. I thought our enterprise funds, our water, sewer, and stormwater were supposed to be balanced by nature. Is that not correct?
Yes, they should be balanced, but also we have some expenditures coming out of water, sewer, stormwater related to capital expenses, right? And so you also see an increase in the capital fund expenditures by quite a bit over 24, included in this preliminary budget. And so there's a lot more capital projects that are occurring in the utilities. The other thing I should note is that we are currently doing a utility rate study that should come back to council in the first quarter of next year as we, it's part of our regular review of our utility rates and what our capital plans and operational needs are for our utilities. And so that's something that will be coming back to council in the first quarter as we look at 2026 rates. Council has already adopted utility rates through 2025, and those are reflected in this preliminary budget.
Okay, so even outside of the enterprise funds, I'm seeing very large decreases in ending fund balance for 2023 compared to 2026. So when we come back into this, I really want to know, are those ending fund balances sustainable? And obviously they'll change with what is proposed, but really trying to understand, are those ending fund balances sustainable? And look at kind of what the percentage decrease or the amount decrease is, because that is really the representative of how much more expenditures are than revenues that we're projecting, which to me in a economy like this is concerning. So.
And thank you, Council President. As we were looking to create this preliminary budget, we did look at our ending fund balances, especially in places like the IT fund, the fleet fund, et cetera. And as we are cutting back, some of those funds have collected large balances while still maintaining the same contributions from the general fund or other funds. And so what we were looking at is, do some of those very large ending fund balances actually make sense? And how are they affecting the rest of the city budget? And so it is something that was intentional, was to eat into some of those ending fund balances that we felt were larger than needed to happen. Now, more information can be provided on where those ending fund balances are that we are concerned about as we look at future projections.
Okay, and along with that, I know we have a financial policy for our general fund, but we don't have a financial policy for the other funds, I would assume?
To my knowledge, we do not.
Okay, that might be something, you know, if we're swaying up and down, that we might want to consider as a council to understand, you know, not just do we use this money in the case of emergencies, but also should we try and create more steady expenditures and not allow something to go up and down as much. I'm thinking of things like the fleet services. If we're building up such a fund there and then not maintaining our fleet, that suggests potential for higher costs through lack of maintenance, et cetera. So, okay, any other questions, comments before we end this item? No? Councilmember Hunt?
On the other fund, and other than the general, those ending fund balances, I think it would also be good to know some of them. I think, like, I was just looking at the school zone safety. I think that for some of them, it is expected that you would accrue and then you would have a project, and so you would draw it down, and then you would want that flexibility within your standard for that fund. So I'm interested in if there are best practices for the other funds, but I do think there are some that are we would expect to be drawn down quite a bit because that's the nature of those funds.
And Council President, if I could just elaborate a little bit, there certainly is a story with each of the enterprise funds. You know, fleet's a great example. You know, a best practice for that would be to look at your fleet, identify the value of each vehicle in the fleet, the expected lifespan for that, and then do some simple division. We have not been very good at that over time, and so that is a way you would do that. So in some cases, you know, some years you're replacing a sedan, some years you're replacing a heavy-duty truck. Those costs vary, but that we would have a plan, so it's not so much a percentage as it is an adopted 7-year, 10-year plan based on the vehicles there. The IT fund's very similar. The utility funds, again, depending on the infrastructure, if you're going to replace so much of water line every year, you build that in. So the percentage works well on the general fund and perhaps some other select funds, but really the others need a plan. And as we have gone through this, Andrea and her team, and I really want to, you know, they've been under some very difficult circumstances with some of our key staff not being available to us, have begun to ask those questions. And, you know, really appreciate Andrea's leadership in those other funds. And so while I don't think we'll have great solutions for a long term with this, I think we're laying some really good groundwork on the other funds. And so as we look at, you know, what the general fund is contributing to some of those funds, I think there is some flexibility. But over time, we want to be very cautious that we're not overextending that flexibility for short-term gain. And again, Andrea, I think, has brought a very keen eye to this. And I think one of the great things I can already see coming out of this is the strength in some of the planning that we'll be able to do for the other funds. It's going to be very difficult to address general fund issues, but I think some of the other funds are going to come out even stronger through this process. So I want to thank Andrea, her team, for being very diligent about that.
Fantastic. That's even better than suggesting there should be a percentage rate. I'm glad we're addressing that. So, no more comments on this. So I think we've got announcements, adjournment, and then an executive session, correct? Okay. And a what? Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, so any announcements? No? Okay, then I am going to adjourn this meeting at 8:23 p.m. Thank you.